Hello, everyone, and welcome to Screen Hype. Today am joined by a very special guest, Ivan Brett from The Traitors. Ivan, thank you so much for joining us.
You're very welcome. Nice to be here.
No, I was honestly so excited when you agreed to this because I was not expecting to love the show as much as I did. And I think that's just been such a huge thing. Like, I've not seen a show have this much hype in such a long time. So did you realize when you were filming just how super popular it was going to get?
There were indications that they were trying to make it a big thing. I mean, I've never seen I haven't done a lot of TV, but I've never seen a cast that big, and everything felt sort of budget-wise, everything felt quite big about it. And while it was happening, we definitely felt like it was exciting. It was fun, but it was just us. So we were never quite, we never knew that people would take to it the way they did. And actually, in a way, we sort of thought, oh, should we have been more horrible to each other? Should we have acted outside of what we really wanted to do and sort of been a bit less natural? But in the end, I think it was the natural way in which we spoke to each other and talked to each other and made friends and then made enemies that made it such compelling watching.
Yeah, definitely, because I don't usually watch reality shows, but with The Traitors, I was just hooked. So do you think that sort of familiarity between all the contestants is what sets it apart from everything else?
Yeah, I mean, reality's a funny word, isn't it? Because reality show is almost a moniker for a lack of that, right? Reality shows are nothing like reality. I think this is a game show, and I think it shows itself as a game show as well. If you have a reality show like one of these kind of semi-scripted shows where people play themselves by name but nothing else, it doesn't have the same drama that ours that ours had, which was essentially loads and loads of game mechanics piled up together, and then you just told to get on with it. So there was no direction, there was no reshoots, there was no, oh, do you want to go over there and start a fight with that person? So in a way, it wasn't reality, and I'm really glad about that. Going into it, I was very concerned that I was going to get wrapped up in a show like the one that we would associate with that word, and it never really turned out like that, so I was quite relieved.
I definitely get what you're saying there, because it really was just something so spectacular. And I've got to say, I loved your exit speech. It was one of my favorite scenes of the whole show. Like, I was gutted you were leaving because you're like my favorite contestant, but the speech was amazing. And I've got to know, did you start planning it in your head when it became clear that someone's going to get you voted off, or did you just make it up on the spot after you were banished?
I may be a writer, but I'm not that good. I'm quite familiar with improv and coming up with good lines, because a lot of my time during my job, I played D&D, and as a DM, I have to make sure that I can think of, cool lines that'll end a session or cool lines that'll send a character reeling. But the key is to know when to think of it, right? So I would hate to think that at some point I stopped fighting to save myself, in order to try and think of a brilliant final line. But there was an element of, through the day, me realizing that there's a magician coming for me, and therefore it's all a big trick, and therefore how funny it would be if that trick went wrong. So those ideas were already running through my head, and then it was just a case of sitting there as people were voting and counting up the numbers and being like, it's going to be within one or two votes, and I think it's not going to go my way. I need to have something. So I just chalked up a few lines. I actually had more lines than I delivered, but in the end I sort of self-edited a little bit. And I'm so glad it went right, because I have this tendency to speak really fast and gabble my lines and sort of lose my head a bit. Like, I do speak really fast, and I have to constantly watch myself that I don't. So in that moment, I was shaking, I was dehydrated, my mouth was clinging together, and somehow I managed to get out that final line. And I think in the end, it probably was slightly, I think Parting Gift was maybe the best line of the show, but I'd like to think I was second.
No, honestly, like, that was not my cut. I literally was like jumped out of my seat. I was like, oh yes, get him, Ivan, get him. That was honestly so amazing. Can you remember any of the lines you didn't include? I'm so curious to know what else was sort of going on in your head.
Well, I'm not really supposed to talk about things that weren't broadcast, but what was going on in my head was definitely a feeling of forgiveness. I wanted to remind everyone that this was a game, because I had treated it as such. And while I'd taken it personally that morning, and while my initial reaction when being put on trial and then being told you're a traitor to my face by this person Tom, who'd come out with this big lie, was emotion, that emotion quickly gave way to game on. Here we go. This is what I came for. Let's do this. So there'd been a lot of things said on that table, and I'd said a few things which were uncharacteristically mean, like, this is going to ruin your career and all this kind of stuff. I'd also said stuff to Alex as well about her manipulating Tom, and in the end, when I stood up there, what I really wanted to do was clear the air before I would potentially not see them ever again, although as it is, of course, we saw each other plenty after the show. So the main spirit of my speech was to make sure that before I delivered any zingers, everyone understood that this was still the game. The game was what mattered. And if anyone lost that, that's when you stopped playing well. And I hope that came across.
No, I think it came across really tactful. So as you left relatively early, you missed out on a lot of the missions. Are there any that you sort of saw in the show that you would have really liked to do?
I mean, the missions were fun. But I think the feeling of FOMO that I felt having been eliminated on end of day 4 was more about the bonds that were formed and the kind of the tactics that were played. I found in many ways the missions to be least interesting, just because they weren't the game. They were a means to, well, they were twofold, weren't they? That first of all, a means to collect the money, but second of all, a means to get everyone bonding before the round table broke it up again. So it was that really, really effective sort of peak and trough of like, everyone's great, everyone hates each other every single day. So yeah, I mean, that last mission on a speedboat looked great. I'd love to jump out of a helicopter. I'd love to do the Mission Impossible one, and the bridge one looked great. But actually, I think the overall feeling of not being there was much more intense in terms of just wanting to be playing that game, wanting to be, neck deep in lies and deceit and manipulation and trying to sort of navigate my way out of it. And so watching the episodes back from 5 onwards, yeah, it was really painful. I felt intensely jealous the whole time, if I'm honest.
Oh no, because I once did an escape room that had like a laser maze. When I was watching that challenge, it was reminded me of that. I was like, oh, that would have been so much fun. But yeah.
I don't know how good I'd be at that, because I feel like that's something that you only find out how good you are when you actually do it. I think probably I would have got my bum on my heel and knocked it over, and then you only get one chance and it's all over, and then that's it. So yeah.
Oh yeah, no, I think that would have been quite a lot of fun. I was like watching, I was like, oh, I wish I was there. But I wasn't necessarily as enthused to try and join on the one. Had to go on that like spinny wheel, stood up where they spin around and said things that looked terrifying.
I was really glad they didn't put me on that one, but not because I didn't want to be upside down, though I didn't want to be upside down. It was because I had noticed that one of my tactics for not getting murdered was do well in the tasks and make sure that people think of you as kind of like, at least in terms of earning money, indispensable. But I had also not wanted to stand out too much. And in the first mission, I'd been very vocal on that boat, and on the second mission, it happened to be music, which I'm quite good at, so I was able to read the music and tell what the song was before they played it. So when it came to day 3 and that wheel, I was thinking, I really need to take a back seat. The best way to do that would be not be picked out of the tombola. So actually, when she didn't call my name, I was relieved, but not for necessarily the reasons that most people would, I think.
That actually makes a lot of sense. Now, one thing I'm very curious about is if the Traitors had sent an invite for you to join them, would you have accepted it?
This is such an interesting question. At the time, during the game, I think I even thought about this and thought no. But every single fibre of my being now says, well, it makes sense. I don't really want to be a traitor. If I were to ever play again, I would still apply to be a faithful. I don't think I'd be a very good traitor. But in terms of survival, if you're offered the traitor and in terms of what do they call it, by seduction, and you don't take it, you're just going to get murdered the next day. And also, as we saw, I don't know if you've seen the American show yet, but there's a couple of interesting things about recruitment and what happens when you announce that people are trying to recruit you, which is also really, really dangerous. So strategy-wise, simply, of course, yes, the optimal play is definitely to take it. But emotions-wise, when you're in there, it's impossible to express how deeply we sort of harbored this hatred of the traitors, which sounds ridiculous. I just told you earlier in this interview, it's all a game. But there was something so us v them about it, that if you were offered to be a traitor, it just wouldn't have felt right. I think they were feeling a lot of guilt, and I was feeling a lot of guilt on their behalf, like vicariously, for all the murders they had to do. And therefore, it did cross my mind once, maybe on day 4, because on day 4, when I was on trial, I did have a thought that maybe the actual trial was, do you want to get recruited as a traitor? Maybe they'll murder one, recruit the other, something like that. So I was thinking about being a traitor on that day and thinking, would I really like this job? And maybe I would have said no. I would certainly never apply to be a traitor. That just wouldn't come into it for me.
That's something, I'm not sure if you're allowed to elaborate on that, but I didn't realize you applied to be either a faithful or a traitor. I just assumed you applied to join the show and they picked randomly. So do you actually say which one you want to be then?
You apply to be on the show, but there are many, many questionnaires, interviews, and so on. And they ask you all the time, what role would you be? And my thinking was always, I want to be a faithful. So no, I didn't apply like into the faithful inbox or the traitor inbox. It's not as simple as that. But they want to know your story. They want to know your thing. And for me, I just wanted to completely get sort of overloaded with the improbability of winning when you're a faithful. It's so much more difficult for faithfuls. I think it's about 3% chance you can win if you start as a faithful, 17% chance you can win if you start as a traitor. So there's more, it's more than 6 times more likely for you to win as a traitor. But that's why I wanted to play faithful. I think you can play faithful really, really well if you look at the numbers, if you remember lots and lots of things using something like a memory palace, and there's other strategies too. You've got so much less power that for me it was a really interesting role to play. I think I probably, as I say, would not have been a particularly good traitor since I don't think I'm a particularly good liar. So that's the other thing. I wasn't in there to manipulate. The entire time I was in there to try and figure things out and use my own strategies to sort of like solve the game. And that's why I think I was better suited to being a faithful than a traitor.
That's very interesting, actually, because when I play Among Us, I always much prefer to be a crewmate because I find it so much more fun figuring out who the imposters are than being the imposter. So because I know you played Among Us on Twitch, do you feel the same?
Well, the last time we played Among Us, we played about 15 games and I wasn't once picked as imposter. I think variety is the spice of life, and I think it is quite fun to be picked sometimes to do the bad stuff. But I do enjoy a mystery. I enjoy the thrill of the chase. And if you are a traitor, you know all the answers immediately, and then it's just a case of hiding it. I love reading murder mysteries, and I love crime fiction. I don't particularly enjoy the endings that often. What I enjoy more is trying to figure it out. So for me, it's obvious. It's an easy choice, yeah.
Now, one thing I'm very curious about is with most contestants, I was able to pinpoint what went wrong. But with you, I felt you never really made any mistakes. You just got really unlucky with Tom gunning for you. But I'm wondering if looking back, is there anything that you felt you could have done differently?
Yeah, I think if I played like uncharacteristically, I think I probably could have got further. There were people in that show who were more intelligent than me that hid their intelligence much more effectively. Ryan is a genius. Imran is a genius, and actually, despite how many times you saw in the edit, we had no idea about his job. Alyssa is incredibly clever. Andrea used to work for the government. These people have huge intelligence and managed to cloak it. And if I had potentially hidden that and been a little bit less forward about my strategizing, then maybe I would have not got picked up by Tom as being a traitor. The game is chaos, and he could have picked anyone at that point. I was trying lots and lots of things, and I wasn't being quiet about my strategy. And I had a thought during the game that being onto people, especially if you're onto the wrong people, is actually quite a good survival tactic. So if I am like Maddie was, if I'm continually going for, say, Aaron, they might not murder me because I think at some point I'll get rid of Aaron. It equally works if you're onto the right person. Maddie being on Wilf, if she's on him and on him and on him, it would be too dangerous for him to murder her because it would leave a trail. So being actively on the hunt for traitors is not necessarily a dangerous thing. But I think the mistake I made was, rather than being on the hunt for traitors, putting in place strategies that would catch traitors that made them feel uncomfortable. So I had all sorts of different things I was suggesting to people about how they would share secrets with each other, and using a sort of triangle strategy format where if you wanted to share a secret with one person, you had to have one other person there as a witness to see it, so that if you got murdered because of the secret you shared, the third person had some sort of leverage to hold against you. And I reckon the traitors probably saw that and were like, don't like this at all. If I hadn't been put on trial that morning, I don't think Tom would have come out and said he thought I was a traitor, because I think at the time he thought he was saving Alex. We're going very deep into the strategy here, but I think my mistake was being too visibly smart. And I don't even think I was particularly smart, maybe too visibly smart instead of actually smart about my strategy. And therefore the traitors were like, just can them as quick as we can.
That's actually very interesting, because I think of all of the players, and I think the reason I liked you the most as a contestant is your kind of approach to the game is very similar to how I tend to approach games, because I'm very into like social deduction games and things like that. So I think I saw a lot of my own tactics in you, and so when you went out so early, I was like, dang, that's how I would have fared.
I'm so sorry.
Now I have to ask you a question. What is your opinion on the parting gift controversy? Do you think Kieran was in the right or the wrong there?
I think whether he was within or slightly beyond the letter of the law is not for me to comment on. I think what we can all agree is that it made good TV, right? So that's what I think we should focus on here. Now, whether they change the rules in the second season or change the wording of the rules in the second season, so those things aren't necessarily allowed, is a different question. But think about it. At that stage in the game, you've only got one chance. They can't, because this game was played like a game rather than played like a TV filming, they couldn't have said, hold up, can you just do that again, but not be so obvious about it. It is what he did. So yeah, I agree. There are questions to be had about how it will affect future games, and I think there's a worry, certainly, if I were the one now directing another series, about what if everyone does that. I think they're going to have to put some sort of, I hate to say punishment, but some sort of incentive or reverse incentive in place so that that doesn't happen again. Nevertheless, it made the final a brilliant episode, and we can't take that away from Kieran.
I agree. I was like, I loved like the whole suspense at the end was brilliant because I was like, Will's got this in the bag, and then that happened, and Will. It wasn't even what he said; it was the way Will reacted to it. He just went spiraling, and it was so brilliant to watch. Now, I have a kind of idea on how they could sort of temper that in the future season. I'm curious if you think it would work. Is they could make it so that if the traitors get voted out, they still get a certain percentage of the money if a traitor wins, and that would stop them kind of betraying the other traitors. Do you think that would be a potential way to deal with it?
That's really interesting. I really like that, actually. I think that is good. That is an incentivized way of doing it. Equally, you could just incentivize everyone by saying, hey, as long as you play by the rules, you're going to get a certain X amount of money just as sort of appearance fee. I don't see any reason why that wouldn't work, except that knowing you're going to get some sort of money might convince you that it's less important to stay in the game. So you know the way Maddie was offered £3,000. In the end, that wasn't enough. But if everyone's offered a significant amount of money, it affects the prize pot, and people might use that as their own, like, well, I'll get out now so you can stay in. It sounds interesting, but I feel like it should be a mechanic. Like, now you've reached the final, you will get that much. I don't know. Does it dilute the drama of you get nothing? Perhaps. But I get what you're saying, and I think it at least means people are incentivized to keep the rules right to the end. There are other things people said, like the way that they do eliminations in the circle, where rather than saying anything at the time, you do a video, record the video, then people get to control it. That's not going to work. I don't think that's good at all. I think you need to have something live, because so many of the great moments in that show were when people stood up on that circle and got to say something. But equally, again, and I'm no spoilers here, but in the US series, a similar situation happens in terms of a traitor being eliminated and something they say, this time definitely not breaking the rules, and I don't even know if Kieran did, but definitely not breaking the rules, but like, it could easily be inferred, and it wasn't, but it could easily have been inferred that there's still a traitor left in the game. So whether you're breaking the rules or not, you've got to listen to those words so carefully, especially with traitors, since they have information that the rest of us don't have. Yeah.
Now, I would like to do a quick fire round, if that's okay. Well, I say a statement, and you say which of your fellow players it would most apply to, and you can't say yourself. You got to say one of the others.
All right. Okay. Let's do it.
Funniest.
Hannah.
Smartest.
Ryan.
Takes ages to get ready.
I've got no idea. Aisha.
If you had to be stuck in a lift for 3 hours with one of them.
Maddie.
Would do well in an escape room.
I think I know the answer to this one. Tom.
Interesting. Life of the party.
Aaron.
Can never make their mind up.
Ooh, that's interesting. I think everyone's really decisive there. Sounds like it's me by not answering. Nobody.
Most determined.
Wilf.
Best cook.
Well, I think that is me. Who's cooked for me? Who makes delicious food? We've spent some time together, and we've mostly had like pizzas from the oven. But I know that Will does a great steak, so I'm going to say Will because he does a great steak.
And closest friend you made on the show?
Ooh, that's so difficult. That does vary, but I've had some really important heart-to-heart with Maddie, and I think probably I'll say Maddie there.
Awesome.